Good day everyone. My name is Engine Cadet Federo John Lawrence S. from UC METC. Me and my groupmates are going to talk about the introduction of globalization by Manfred Steger. But before we proceed, we would like you to know that this is for educational use only. Our group is allowing our instructor, Mr. Roldan Ardines, to use this as an educational material. So let me state first our five main objectives in this topic. Our objective is to first to discuss the study of globalization by Manfred Steger. Second is to discuss the ideologies of globalization. The third one is to state the sentiments of Michael Freden. The fourth one is to state the contributions of Alger Faraday. And the last is to discuss the different scapes of globalization. First, what is globalization? Globalization refers to the expansion and intensification of social relations and consciousness across world time and world space. It talks about the interrelationship or connection of each countries or cities across the globe and can take effect in developing the growth of a certain nation such as economy, culture, political, and any other things that is related to the growth aspect of globalization. An example of globalization is the transaction, trading, presidential gatherings such as ASEAN Summit and United Nations, and many other activities that whole world is involved. Also, Steggers considers the major dimensions of globalization. First is economic, second is the political, third is the culture, and fourth one is the ecological and even ideology of globalization. The first one is economic. Economic refers to the expansion and intensification of social relation and consciousness across world time and world space. It is mainly focuses on the world trade in order for the nation to progress. Also, to provide the to provide what the certain nation needs, and the example of that is importing and or exporting some goods or materials, and that is the advantage of globalization contributed, because from the word itself, economy, it could develop the economic growth or economic status of a certain country. Second, the political. Political refers to the intensification and expansion of political interrelations across the globe. It is about the political views and interests. It is also one of the advantages of the globalization to strengthen the relationship of each government wherein they are engaging in international meetings. For example, of that is the presidential visits for some reason, and it is either for contract, the international trades, and many more that can develop the nation. And the other example of that is as what I have said earlier, that ASEAN Summit and United Nations. The third one is the cultural. Cultural explores the intensification and expansion of the cultural flows across the globe. It is basically focuses on the cultures of each nation. For example, for the people to discover the different regulations and could lessen the ignorance. It is one of the good factor that globalization shows. the awareness of the people who wants to visit other locals. The best example of this is the seafarers, who are engaging with different nationalities, specifically international seafarers. And it is important for them to know the behavior, the culture, the regulations, so that they are mindful enough from the people who they are not familiar with. In addition, when docking in different places in the world, when they go to stroll, they are they there they
Third
will
is
notice
cultural.
Cultural explores the intensification and expansion of cultural flows across the globe. It is basically focuses on the cultures of each nation for the people to discover the different regulation and to lessen the ignorance. It is one of the good factors that globalization shows. The awareness of the people who wants to visit other locals. The best example of this is the domestic or OFW, like seafarers, who are engaging or dealing with different nationalities. And it is important for them to know the behavior, the culture, the regulations, so that they are mindful enough from the people who they are not familiar with. In addition, when visiting in different places in the world, they go to stroll, and there they will notice the culture of that place by observing the people in the surroundings. The fourth is ecological. Ecological include population growth, access to food, worldwide reduction in biodiversity, the gap between rich and poor as well as between the global north and global south, human-induced climate change, and global environmental degradation. It is somehow talks about the relations of the living organism to one another and to the physical surroundings. Globalization helped the ecology to balance each organism by the international laws, which supported by the equality of each living organisms. And one of the example in globalization, the international law, which is the NTCOL, or the International Association of Ecology, which studies and protect the ecosystem. So my next reporter who are going to discuss the ideologies of globalization by Manfred Steiger as my co-reporter, Engine Cadet Kadungog Mark S. Wait. Before we end the discussion, let us inform you that the globalization is different to internationalization, because internationalization refers to the way in which a certain company increases its footprint in the international market, while the globalization refers to the process in which the local markets and economies on the whole connect, sharing universally accepted rules and regulations.
Hi, my name is Marcus Kadungog, and I am here to report the ideologies of globalization. To make persuasive a case for a new level global order based on their beliefs and values, these globalists constructed a disseminated narratives and image that associated the concept of globalization with an inexorably expanding free market. First, market globalism advocates promises and communist neoliberal free market hold. In a increasingly interdependent and integrated global economy, marketing globalization is a synergistic word integrating the promotion and a sale of goods and services. It renders the business stateless, the mind of boundaries with the internet serving as a virtual marketing and cultural instrument. Example: take crude oil. Many equities will still fall if the value of the oil rises, leading oil prices increases. Second, justice globalism. Envisage a global civil society with fairer relationships and environmental safeguards. Justice globalism is an envision, a move just as an environmental conscious global civil society. The goals of religious globalism is to create a global religious community that is superior to secular system. Example of justice globalism is undergraduate and graduate students in the social sciences and humanities who are taking course on globalization, global 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 studies and global justice will believe justice globalism being an interesting read. And the last one is the religious globalism. Strive for a global religious community with a superiority over secular structures. So, money superiority guys ha. For the meaning there, okay. Re- religious globalism are religious worldliness, the what that express methods of interpreting the global environment. Religious and secular globalism are often seen as having an dichotomous connection in the literature, with the former related against the latter. Example of the religious globalism is the Roman Catholic Church, including with many of its religious orders, Seventh-day Protestant and Eastern Orthodox churches, the World Council of Churches, Seventh-day Adventists, the widespread Pentecostal movement, and Jehovah's Witnesses cease to be just few examples.
Good day, everyone. I'm Vincent John Caesar, and for the next topic is the sentiments of Michael Fed. So, before we discuss about the sentiments of Michael Fed, who is Michael Fed? So, Michael Freden is an professorial politics associate at the Department of Politics. So, we will back to the topic. Sentiments of Michael Freden. So, according to Michael Freden, globalization was not indicated as an ideology, but a range of processes nesting under one rather unwieldy epithet. So, nowadays, since we are developed by the most high technology, let's say, for example, the culture of every Filipino. With globalization, we can use our technology so that the culture of every Filipino will be globalized or recognized in every country. So this will be the idea of Michael Freden, and so for the sentiments of Freden, globalization was not denoted as an ideology, but a range of processes nesting under one rather than the mature ideologies display unique feature anchored in distinct conceptual morphologies and philosophical inconsistencies, and semantic tensions are the result of unavoidable and cultural constraints, and therefore are bound to decrypt any political belief system. So this line, Freden says that philosophical and semantic belief
are the consequences of unavoidable constraints. And the lastly, but not the least, the globalism deserves to be recognized and be separated ideological family. And the last stanza, or the last line where we choose, is Freden says that globalism are deserved to be separated to ideological family, where I am agree with, according to my analytical opinion. And, and before I end this discussion, um, sentiments of Freden is all about of his expression or comments about the globalization, because Freden is an professional professorial politics, and he has a more knowledge about that kind of studies where globalization. And as far as I know, globalization can help, let's say for example, there are more benefits of globalization. It can help to be more identify the culture, products, or other that should be implemented nationwide, or all over the country. And that's all for the sentiments of Reddit. Thank you.
My name is Engine Cadet Salatorio Unit P, and I am assigned to discuss the contributions of Arjun Apuday on the globalization. There are a lot of contributions that Apuday contributed. Since the topic is only about globalism, I will just going to discuss this culture and difference in the global culture economy in 1990, which related to the globalization. Arjun Apuday defines the central problem and modern day globalizations as the tension between homogenization and heterogeneization. Homogenization is a type of culture or nation which only include their own culture and not accepting another. The example of homogenization is the Sentinel Islands, Brazil, which they are group of people that does I want interaction and connection to the other for sake their way intergenerations process adaptation of elements of global culture to local cultures, which they are often adapt to other cultures. Example of this Asian Summit, United Nations and etc., which they created association to become united and for trending. Apuday claims that search theories do not take into account is that various cultural elements which under globalization which new societies are often indigenized to the local culture, which means not all local cope the new societies. Example is the Africa, they do not even totally know the use of technology and they ain't able to catch up the current trends because of poverty. Also, he authorized Inoscape, Mediascape, Technoscape, Finanscape, and Eduscape, which be going to discuss by co-reporter Miljan
So I
Ginawano.
am Cadet Miljan Dinawano. So I will discuss the five paradisescapes of globalization. The first one is the ethnoscapes, the migration of people across cultures and borders. Basically, this refers to the flow of people globally, which means people travel across the world to find some jobs and opportunities in a specified countries just to help their family's needs, or maybe they just want a good salary to earn nationwide. Like for example, the OFW. The second one is the mediascapes, the variety of media that shape the way we understand our world. Basically, media is the biggest voice across the world, which means media is the one who provide some relevant information globally and to justify some details about the happenings across the world. Also, we connected as one and understand one another's culture just because of media. For example, YouTube, Facebook, and many others which they provide information just to know the other country's culture and other details. So the third one is the technoscapes, the scope and movement of technology. It's either mechanical and informational around the world. Basically, right now, we have indulged the use of technology, which helps us to become more productive in the use of it. Globally speaking, the world has been already absorbed by a different kind of technology, such as robots, lasers, gadgets, transportations, and many others. Technology is very significant to people across the world, like we are connected and unified as one. So the fourth one is the finances scapes, the worldwide flux of money and capital. Basically, this defined as cross-border movements, like the example, in which include the cash or electronic equivalents, like bank transfers, and such as stocks via stocks exchange, commodities via commodities markets, currencies via currency exchanges, and in today's era, things like decentralized virtual currencies such as Bitcoin via peer-to-peer mechanisms as well as exchanges. This method of transferring really helps the people across the world in accessing direct money with their own different types of businesses globally. So lastly, the eduscapes, the global flows of ideas and ideologies. So basically, by this type of scapes, this produces more signified ideas about the one's own countries. In such ways, political discourses have their own perception from their own places of observation, with the people needs in a specified area. Then maybe that's the time they will conduct a good measurement or any countermeasures just to achieve the goal as one country. Like for example, people's freedom, rights, authority, and etc.
In addition, let me show you a video presentation about the topic of globalization.
Hello, students. So, today, as we start our discussion about our course about contemporary world, let us try to find out why do we consume these foods? Why do we go to fast food such as Jollibee and McDo? Why do we subscribe on these subscriptions? Like, for example, Netflix, and why do we buy items on Mobile Legends or skin on Mobile Legends or items in Dota? Or have you ever asked yourself, why do you buy 100 bucks of coffee or a 2000 bucks of planner in Starbucks? Or patronize Apple products such as iPhone, iWatch, MacBook, and those tablets? Why do Jinky Pacquiao and Heart Evangelista spend millions just for a bicycle and a bag? This is because we are living in a contemporary world. Contemporary world means that this is the modern world we are living, the current world that we are celebrating. So, as we discuss contemporary world, we better understand these topics. These two topics here are global age and globalization. What does it mean, global age? When we say global age, we try to see a period of time. And we believe in the contemporary world that the world is aging. According to its definition, it is a period of time when there is a prevailing sense of interconnectedness of all human beings, of common fate for human species, and a threat to its life on this earth. So let us go back with the definition about global age. Meaning to say, this tells us that this is a period of time where human beings are interconnected with each other. Despite that we are not living in the same roof, despite that we're not living in the same country, we are still connected with one culture, one tradition, and one common faith, and that is for survival of human species. These two topics here are global age and globalization. What does it mean? Yes, we know already what is global age. Therefore, let us try to analyze what is happening in the global age, and that is globalization. Wow, this is quite a very lengthy definition of globalization. But let us try to dissect the definition of globalization. Since we all know that we are now currently experiencing the age which we call as the global age, therefore, we have to better understand what is happening during global age, and that is globalization, of which it is a process of interaction and integration among people, companies, and government of different nations. So that's it. That's the first definition. Of which, take note, it is a process, meaning to say it's a step to step process. You cannot jump from step 1 to step 5 while the others are left behind. Meaning to say, it goes along with a process, it goes along with the specific steps in achieving globalization. And this process involves two things: the interaction and integration. Meaning to say, people, companies, and government interact with each other despite of their differences and similarities. They interact, and thus, if their interaction is good or bad, they are now being integrated as one. Okay? And another definition, it is a process driven by international trade and investment and aided by information technology. So, when we discuss globalization, we discuss about economic globalization. On our succeeding discussion, you will learn that the main tool or the main drive of globalization is economic globalization. So, part of it is international trade and investment and aided with information technology or the technology we are experiencing today. Another is it discuss here the process has its effects. We believe that all of the things we do on earth has effects, whether it is good or bad, positive or negative, or advantage or disadvantage. All of the things in earth has effects. So, what are these effects? Effects on the environment, on culture, on political systems, on economic development and prosperity, and on human physical well being in societies around the world. Take note, one of the effects is in environment. A very good example of it is having climate change today. On culture, we try to adopt different cultures, like, for example, the adaptation of us loving K-pop or loving Korean dramas and loving Korean pop music or pop culture or Korean culture today. So that's one of the example of globalization. And let us try to take note about globalization is. First, it is about liberalization and global integration of market. Take note that we discussed that one major drive of globalization is economics, and that's why we are trying to look on the market system, meaning to say liberalization. When we are talking about liberalization, it talks about freedom to choose, freedom to have businesses. So that's it. That's globalization. Next is globalization is inevitable and irreversible. When we are talking about inevitable and irreversible, meaning to say we cannot erase, we cannot vanish globalization because globalization is here. We cannot go back to the time. Like for example, we can no longer go back to the pre-Hispanic age or even on the Renaissance or even on the medieval age of the world. We have to face globalization. Next is nobody is in charge of globalization. You, me, and us is never in charge of making globalization. We are just here as one of the tools that drives globalization itself. We are just here as part of the process of globalization. Next is benefits everyone in the long run. You and me, us, human race and human species benefits as being part of the process of of globalization. Yes, the benefit may be an advantage or a disadvantage to others, but let us try to look on a brighter side that globalization benefits all of us. Next is the further spread of democracy in the world. Going back to your social science, democracy talks about the majority rule, or meaning to say, the majority rule must prevail and the minority must be protected. So, if it is democracy, therefore, when we try to go on the process of globalization, therefore, we try to spread the majority rule, or what we call as the sonum bonum, or the good for all. That's sonum bonum. And lastly, globalization requires a global war on terror, which means that when we engage on the process, it deals a war. War because we try to change the current situation or the current status quo we are living. So that's it. That's globalization. I hope you have better understanding about globalization. If you have questions, feel free to ask on our next session. Now, let's move forward. These two topics here are global age and globalization. What does it mean in contemporary world? Contemporary world means that this is the modern world we are living, the current world that we are celebrating. So, as we discuss contemporary world, we better understand these topics on conceptualizing what is globalization. So later, we will understand on the definition of Ritzer, of which it is a transplanetary process or processes involve increasing liquidity and growing multi-directional flows, as well as the structures they encounter and create. That's according to Ritzer. Let's try to analyze it later, the underlined words. Now, let us go first on conceptualizing how did we deal with the process of globalization. There are three processes to consider in understanding globalization. First is creating people, creating what we call as transnational. What does it mean by transnational? These are individuals. This is me, this is you, creating transnational, of which we possess and we interconnect with each other despite of our differences in culture, tradition, language, and many others. So we created individuals. Now we transformed these individuals and we created social groups or communities. Therefore, we created now transnationality, which is the rise of new communities that creates new social identities in our today's world. So that's it. Upon creating a new community, we create now new social condition. Meaning to say, we create now a new social community, new norm, new culture, new tradition, of which we call it as globality. Or it is an omnipresence to the process of globalization. Or this is the product of globalization. All right. So that's it, the process. We create people and we create transnational. Therefore, as we create people, we create communities, and that is transnationality. And lastly, as we create community, we create now a social condition which we call as globality or the product of globalization. Contemporary world. Contemporary world means that this is the modern world we are living, the current world that we are celebrating. So, as we discuss contemporary world, we better understand these topics. So, as Ritzer's definition as an increasing liquidity and multidirectional flows as a definition of globalization, to better understand it, we use metaphors. Going back to your English, we used figurative language as a substitute to words or definitions of things, like simile, hyperbole, and many others. So, let's try to deeper our understanding about metaphors. So, first is solidity. We use solidity as what? As to describe a limited mobility of people, things, information, and places over time. Going back to your chemistry, when we say solid, the atoms are compact and cannot easily move, or it has limited mobility. Like in our globalization, in the contemporary world, solidity meaning to say we have limited mobility because we call it, there is what we call as barriers. Barriers later will be discussed. Contrary to solidity is liquidity. It's an increased ease of movement of people, things, information, and places in the global age. Meaning to say, going back to your chemistry again, when we say liquids, atoms are free flowing. Therefore, they free from any directions. That's liquidity. So, here in contemporary world, liquidity means we are the people, not the atoms, but people, things, information, and places has an increase and free flowing. All right? Another metaphor is heavy. When when therefore it hardens or there is a limited move, and if it is heavy, we have difficulty to move. And if it's difficult to move, therefore it is heavy. Like for example, if you're carrying a very tons of load, therefore it is heavy for you to move. Contrary to it is easier to move, meaning to say, if it is easy, if if we don't have any burdens or barriers at all when we are moving, therefore it is easier to move and it is what they call as light. So upon moving to solid to liquid, heavy to light, there is what we call as flow. The movement of people, things, information, and due to the what? Porosity of global barriers. So there are barriers of which flows affects. Later, we will know what are these barriers. So take note that globalization flows from solid to liquid, from heavy to light. So that's the movement of globalization. To better understand the movement or the flow of globalization, let us try to look at on this illustration below. Looking to the illustration below on your right, on your left rather, this is the evolution of communication. As you can see, we have a hardened we have a hard time. There is there is a limited mobility of communication before. Looking back, if you would like to communicate before, you have to burn woods and to create smoke to signal one community to the other that a you have a message for them. Thus, we use dove. So it transformed, and we use dove or crows or birds to deliver our message to a specific person or to specific groups. However, as time goes by, we changed that one and we created computers. Computers that delivers our message to the other person with just one click. Because of a very bulky computers, we turned it down into laptops. Laptops that are easier and handy for all of us to send message. And as we flow with globalization, we turned laptops to mobile phones. Mobile phones that as an easy as one click, we could send message, we could record, we could have cameras on your mobile phones as easy as that. So that's it. As you can see, the flow of globalization from a, from a solid or a limited mobility, we transform it with an increased movement of communication. Now, as you can see in the next figure, you could see how we write our letters. Before, we used it as a handwritten. So, we created and we improvised by creating typewriters. We typewrite our letters and then send it to post mails. However, we change it now with by the use of our computers and our laptops. We try to put it on a word, then try to print it and deliver it to a person. However, we change it now by the use of our tablets and our phones. Just by a click of a hand, a minute, the person will receive your message. So that's it. That's how globalization turned to become one of the succeeding influence of today contemporary world.